because I would encourage every parent to do that reflective practice of thinking about what are the things that I don't have resolved in my life and in my childhood, as I was growing up with my parents, whatever, that are impacting or potentially could impact how I parent.
Welcome back. I am so excited because today I have both my daughters here with me. We're going to have a conversation about family traumas, family wounds, and my daughter, Melissa Bond, she's actually a doctor. She has a PhD in psychology from Palo Alto University. She has got experience in clinician work and also in research, but also she's my daughter. So we're gonna have this conversation that's going to include some of her wisdom and experience, but also just our own family experience. So Melissa, welcome. So glad that you're with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm still here, so you can't get rid of me. You can't get rid of me. But so excited to be having this conversation. I always glean on Melissa. Believe it or not, she is my younger sister, but you wouldn't know it because she is a heck of a lot smarter than me and acts a lot more mature in most situations. So I'm really excited to have this conversation, especially over kind of a heavy topic, but I feel like we can have a really great conversation.
Yeah, and this is a follow-up to our podcast that we did on Dr. Wollen's book, It's Not About You, where we went deep into his studies, his research. And, we were all talking and Melissa thought, I can talk about that. So yeah, so good to have you. And, we're going to talk about this family dysfunction, family trauma, all these different things. Is there a part that you're like, let's talk about that first?
No, ask me a question, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the areas that, especially after reading Dr. Wollen's book, is this idea of family dysfunction. So, a lot of people say this, like every family is dysfunctional, which makes us all kind of feel seen and understood in one way. But in another way, it makes every family the same. And there are families who have really severe dysfunctional patterns that cause just massive damage. And I remember when you were going through your, what is it called? After you
internship, postdoc.
Yeah. You'd shared, not details and names or anything like that, but the circumstances of some of these stories. And you realize, wow, some people are really harmed in their family systems.
Yeah.
And so when we say every family is dysfunctional, are we not painting everyone with either too light of a brush and maybe being very, not really very compassionate towards people who have a deeper problem, or we're making every family, like that, right? Mm-hmm. So, I kind of like to say, maybe I didn't say this, I read this somewhere, but this idea that every family has dysfunctional patterns possibly, or dysfunctional areas, but not every family is, quote, dysfunctional. It's not a good title to use. It's too broad. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say so. Definitely. So my work, I guess, for some background, is in child parent psychotherapy. So that was where I did my internship and my postdoc and where you heard most of those stories. And it's heavy work because the work is focused on, children 0 to 6 who have experienced some kind of trauma. So they're actually experiencing their own trauma, not just sort of the generational piece that you guys have spent a lot of time on. But as you dig into that work, you find a lot that the parents also experience trauma. And that's why they're sort of in this cycle. And what we've learned also in the kind of looking at the data and in the research is that when a parent has experienced trauma, their child is much more likely to experience trauma. So it's not just that they're experiencing the effects of the parent's trauma, but they're actually experiencing more trauma as well.
How sad.
Do we know why that is?
Yeah.
I would say, I can't say
for sure,
like what the research would say in that space, but I can say that, I think when parents have experienced trauma, they're often in systems and cycles that cause trauma. Yeah. Right. So a person who's been traumatized is more likely to be re-traumatized.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it sort of extends to the child in that they're still in these traumatizing environments.
Yeah.
Right. So a parent who, the CPP, which is child parent psychotherapy, originated from something called infant parent psychotherapy, which was focused on children who had witnessed domestic violence. So that means in this situation, both mom and child, most times mom, right? Not always, but most times mom and child are experiencing the trauma at the same time.
Yeah.
But oftentimes that domestic violence has kind of been a string of events, right, for the mom.
Yeah.
And so it's not even mom's only trauma. And it's also not child's only trauma. And then you add in societal, economic layers of where they live or what their income is and those kinds of things. And you just see it sort of start to pile on. And so you have, neighborhood safety as an issue and things like that. But then you also have this cycle of violence and, children, especially in domestic violence situations, children may not be harmed, but they're at risk of being harmed in those situations because they end up in the middle or things like that. So I think that is something that we see a lot of in that sort of cycle. And like you said, Mom, to kind of go back to your original question of like the dysfunction piece is like that really is, I think, where we see a lot of dysfunction, where you see these, I guess, like people use like little t and big T trauma. I don't really love those terms.
Dr. Wolin uses that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't love those terms, and I don't have a really great reason because obviously there's trauma that fits the criterion of the kind of diagnostic manual, right? And so everything else sort of would be little t. But even in domestic violence situations, they can potentially fit that criterion and potentially not. And so that's where, how do we categorize little t versus big T? What is little t to some people and big T to others?
Right, how you respond to it matters, right?
Right.
I remember him saying that trauma is when you're in a situation that overwhelms your capacity to either protect yourself or get out of the harmful situation. And so that vulnerability, that deep vulnerability, then causes some form of trauma, a wound.
Yeah.
In which case, that can happen in a small t or a big T environment. And again, it's how you respond to it or to what depth is there a wound. I think that's how he did it, which I liked. Because it kind of did the little t, big T, but it gave everything more of a broad.
Yeah. At Trochia Ministries, our goal is to help you strengthen your relationship with God and grow in your character-led leadership. We have courses just for those things. Our course, Character-Led Leadership, is all about how to develop your character, whether in your workplace, whether in your church life, or in your home life. The course is completely free to you. All you have to do is head on over to our website to get more information. We also have our Uncharted course. Our Uncharted course is a part of Inés's book, Uncharted, Navigating Your Unique Journey of Faith. And that course follows along video instruction to help you either do the study guide with someone else or on your own. You can find more information about our courses at trochia.org. But I will say, I see what you're saying, Boo. Sorry, for everybody else, I call her Boo. This is my sister, Melissa. She's a doctor, but it's just nicknames.
And what does that stem from again? Does that stem from Bunak?
Yeah, from Bunak.
Which was Chad?
Yeah, from Chad. Yeah.
Yes,
So
he gives everybody a nickname.
yeah, so you're getting an
Mine
inner
is the
working
one that
of our
really
family.
stuck, though.
It did.
It is.
Because it was written on a cooler.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it is
Makes it
forever.
official.
It is forever ingrained.
What nickname did he give you?
I don't think I ever had a name. Truly. Like, I was always just Kay or Kayleigh. I was KK a lot, but yeah.
Kayleigh was the princess.
That's true.
I mean,
that's true.
I'm wearing a crown.
Talk about family dysfunction. No, just kidding.
I mean, anyways, going back. So I think what Melissa was saying about this whole conversation too, about like what makes it big T versus little t, and the complexity that it really is based on the person, the dynamic, the family, the situation, and the response, right? So I think I look at like my situation, and I know we've talked about this quite a bit on the podcast, but like I look at what happened. My kids witnessed, physical aggression and physical abuse. And part of me wonders like, okay, what is that going to look like for them? And you can look at my two kids, and one of them has a more anxious kind of dynamic and response. She's very aware of situations and reacts out of that anxiety. She'll get very intense, versus my other daughter, who maybe it's a little bit more like ingrained deeply. She doesn't really notice it as much. And then something will trigger it, and then there will be a reaction. But it's not as constant or aware as my other. So I think it just shows the difference. I think for my one daughter, it would be considered a big T, versus my other daughter would be considered a little t, based on their reaction,
how it's
and how it's
expressed.
been expressed.
Is that true, Melissa? Is the way a person responds a way of measuring the level of trauma, or is that a false?
I mean, I think you have two different constructs in a sense. You have the construct of what is a trauma, and you have a construct of what is post-traumatic stress. And so I think what you're describing is that maybe your older daughter experienced more post-traumatic stress from that event than your younger daughter.
Yeah.
So I think that's where you might see that they had the same event, and that event, in theory, if we could define it perfectly, would have the same sort of definition of, you know, whether that was a trauma or not.
Yeah.
But, and they might have experienced different events too, right? You know, if one was there and one wasn't, and how they were in the midst of it. You know, I think your older daughter was much more, age. Your older daughter was much more in the middle of those situations because she was older. And she sort of inserted herself. That also has to do with personality, right? And so I think that plays a role. And then how we respond is sort of the post-traumatic stress piece of, you know, not everyone who experiences a trauma, even a big T trauma, develops post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Or develops the same amount of post-traumatic stress. And so I think that's something that we are often trying to understand in the research and even in our work is like, how is this person, how is this family, this child reacting to this same trauma? And you might see that sometimes what happens, especially with the young kids, is that the parent has a different response than the child, and that can cause conflict.
Yeah.
Where now you have this relational conflict because the child wants to avoid and the parent doesn't, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And so, or you have two children and one child wants to avoid and the other doesn't. And one child is really having these outbursts and that's causing the other child to avoid and withdraw more.
Yeah.
And so you have, and that's where you also see things build on one another, right? Going back to sort of this cycle and how we, you know, if a parent has trauma, their child is more likely to experience trauma is partly because their response. Yeah. The parent's response also might be, if a parent is traumatized, experiences some trauma, oftentimes you see situations where they maybe have a skewed view of what is dangerous and what's not. So they might be more likely to put themselves and their children in dangerous situations because what they see as dangerous is different. And then you see other situations where they kind of pull in and they are afraid of everything. And that can also cause difficulties and issues for the kids. So, now I'm forgetting the question.
No, I think that's really helpful.
That's good stuff. Yeah. I have a question for you. So when you went to school, you said that your postdoc was related to child psychotherapy. Did you study child psychotherapy as your actual doctorate process, or was that what you ended up focusing on when you finish?
I would say the main thread of my work, both clinically and in research, is trauma more broadly. So not so much specific on child work. My PhD is in clinical psychology, right? So it's broad. And we could focus. I chose not to. I liked to have more of a generalist approach. But I did a lot of my work in community-based settings where trauma is the big thing that you see. And so I worked 2 years also at the shelter network Life Moves in the Bay Area. It's the biggest shelter network in the Bay Area. And so I did my practicum there 2 years while I was in my PhD program and saw very few kids. I mostly worked with actually older adults. We saw a lot of older adults that were experiencing homelessness or had been experiencing homelessness their whole life or were disconnected from family and all of those things. So the child piece actually didn't come more into play. I did see children in schools for a little bit. But definitely my experience with CPP was kind of like the biggest kind of dive into my work with kids.
And you there were working with kids and parents.
Yes.
And the dynamic there.
And so that's an important piece of child-parent psychotherapy is that it's what we call the dyadic treatment. So we see both the child and the parent together
at the same time.
At the same time. Now we might have we call them collaterals with the parent, and even sometimes with the child, although rarely. Most of the time we have either the parent individually or the parent and the child together. And usually that would be in addition to, not instead of, those dyadic sessions. So the dyadic session is really where we have the bulk of the work is with the child and the parent together.
So going back to what you said earlier, we respond differently to the experiences. So now you've got the two together and they're responding or sharing the story. Does that get more complicated? It seems like it would get more. Are you trying to bring them to a unified place where the story becomes more like something both of them own the same way, or
not necessarily the same way, but
or understand
because
each other?
We're working with the age of 0 to 6. The theory there is that kids, the real agent of change in kids' lives at that age especially is the parents, is their caregiver, their primary caregiver. Seeing a kid once a week, we can't do a whole lot with that child if they're going back to an environment where they are not heard or they're not seen, they're not able to play out what they're experiencing or what they have experienced. And so working with the parent is really vital. And because of this other piece of, the parent also experienced a trauma, and especially where IPP, infant parent psychotherapy, where that was sort of originally was focused on children who had witnessed domestic violence. So now this is a shared trauma for both mom and the baby. And so that's sort of where it got its roots. But I think we've seen now that it can be expanded to even single event traumas that only the child experienced, or traumas, even extreme situations where mom is very, very traumatized. And although the child hasn't experienced a trauma of their own, you see just those generational effects being so intense because mom is so traumatized and is experiencing so much post-traumatic stress that's really affecting the young child. So it's both more complicated, yes, and also we see it as without it, we're missing something.
How to help them.
We're not really able to fully help that child if we don't help the parent. And seeing, I think, a parent and child kind of come together in that and share that space really does, I think, it heals the family more so than just this child. Right?
Yeah. Give us some examples of the types of trauma that you saw. Just because someone listening, we're using the term, and anyone can think, okay, what is a trauma? Do I have a trauma? Am I part of this conversation?
Yeah.
Like, what kinds of things did you see?
Yeah. So, on the child side, it could vary a lot. Definitely because of the roots of CPP, the bulk of our work still is often in situations of domestic violence.
Okay.
So where a parent, a caregiver comes in and has experienced domestic violence, and their child has witnessed that and they want help with that. We also have situations of foster care where the child's been removed from the home, foster care, or maybe a grandparent who's taken on the care of the child because the child was removed from the home because of exposure to domestic violence or drug use or those kinds of things. So that might be on the child side. There's also, single instances where it was a car accident that they got into. Medical trauma is really common in the really young age because they don't understand what's happening. And as it is for adults, right, it can be traumatizing when something really significant happens and we have to go into the hospital and we're getting poked and prodded. But then imagine being a 1-year-old in that experience. And now you don't have a way of contextualizing that or understanding that, and it's just really scary.
So it would be a child that is suddenly at a hospital for an extended period of time.
Right.
Like, I have friends who are going through that right now. Their kids been in the hospital so much.
Yeah.
And that, in a sense, it's a form of trauma that child experiences.
Yeah,
but they
especially,
can't express it.
you have the combination of the event that caused them to go to the hospital, whatever that is, can be, potentially a trauma in itself. But you also have, if they're sick or they're experiencing some sort of illness, they're experiencing fear about what that means for their bodily safety, right? And
if they have cancer or some condition.
Yeah. And even if they don't have something that's maybe potentially fatal, I think kids don't have a way of understanding the difference.
Yeah.
Right. So to them, they're just experiencing something's wrong with me. I'm sick. I'm not well. And that's scary. Yeah. So I think that is, another thing, we might see situations where a child was sexually abused, and that could be repeated by a caregiver or a family member or someone they know. It could also be a single event. So those are some events that the child has experienced. And then the range gets a lot wider when you add the parent in,
and
the
caregiver.
Siblings, yeah.
Right? Like a sibling who gets left behind while the one that's in the hospital is being cared for.
Right. Yeah.
And
separation is a big one.
Left out.
Yeah. Separation is also a big one. When they get separated from a caregiver for an extended period or even a short period of time, but under really stressful circumstances, that can be a really difficult situation for both parent and child. And then on the parent, you have this much wider range, right? But obviously domestic violence is going to be a big one. But we also have situations where they have their own complicated histories and childhood traumas of neglect or physical abuse, experiences of caregivers, separation from their own caregivers, death of someone in their, family. And so you just have a much wider range as far as like what they're coming in with and carrying into that relationship. And that kind of is one of the topics I was thinking about introducing to you guys, which is called Ghost in the Nursery. And that's
tell us. I'm engaged.
So that is this idea that these unresolved things that happen to us as adults, we kind of carry into our relationship with our child. Even when they're very young, even when our child's very young. And so oftentimes, there's a sort of misunderstanding about what is the ghost, right? Is it a person? Is it a memory? And it's really neither. It's more of the unresolved feelings related to those events or people.
Do you connect with Dr. Wallen's language, or at least his research about past family, situations, an uncle that was murdered or something, where that brings some sort of generational tense or emotions? Does that fit with that?
I think that would depend on how that parent has resolved or not resolved that memory, right? Because so it's more about, a ghost isn't just a trauma. It's not like every trauma you experience becomes a ghost into the new relationship with that child. It might be, do you still have unresolved feelings about that? So if that, to kind of just put some random examples to this, of that situation of like an uncle dying. Okay, so if you had an uncle die and you were extremely close to that uncle, and so it was it came at a bad time in your life, right? Let's think, and you had a hard time coping. That might sit differently with you through your life, and if you don't, get therapy, you don't have a space to bring that to. That might feel like a much bigger loss than if you didn't know that uncle very well, or you weren't that close with him, or even if you were, but you were able to capture all the positive things that came from that uncle and carry those on, how the nature of the uncle's death, all these things can play into whether or not that person is able to sort of resolve their feelings around it and carry something positive from it, have that kind of post-traumatic growth, or if it becomes unresolved, suppressed, and then carries into as like a kind of those feelings carry forward as sort of a ghost.
And that's the ghost.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting, because Wolin would say that he really focused on epigenetics, right? And like the science behind, especially with the mother, but even with men, how the genetics even play a role. That's like during pregnancy, because the eggs are inside of a woman when they're going through this trauma, this experience or whatnot. And so that, he explained a lot about the Holocaust and this experience of people who had never experienced anything like that trauma still felt some of the emotions associated with their ancestors or their grandparents who had lived through the Holocaust.
The anxiety
or depression, fear. So I thought that was like really interesting. And it sounds like the ghost in the nursery concept or idea kind of in some ways has that, but a little bit more more expanded. Like there's more to it.
Too, not just physical.
Yeah, it's not just like a very specific instance, but it's like anything that happened in the course of this parent's life that led to, that could lead to something that is carried out to their child.
Yeah. And I would say I don't know a lot of the research on the epigenetic piece. What I do know is that those things are somewhat flexible in the sense that you can both kind of affect your kind of genetics through epigenetics, and you can also like negatively, and you can also affect them positively.
Yeah.
Right. So what we've seen, there was actually a recent study that was published on CPP that showed basically cellular aging can be affected by treatment or no treatment. And so when if you don't experience treatment, if you don't have treatment after a trauma, you might see that cellular aging is accelerated. Essentially that our cells look older than we are. And that would be both, I think adults but in this case, it was looking at the child's, cellular aging. But when they receive treatment, they're actually, it's sort of, that process is treated. And so the cellular aging acceleration slows.
Wow, that's good.
Interesting. That's so fascinating.
So that would make me wonder, because again, I don't know the research on epigenetics. I'm not an epidemiologist. Oh my God.
Epidemiologist. I got you. That is a weird word.
I wouldn't know how to say that.
But I am not in that world at all. So I can't say, I might be saying something completely wrong. But I would wonder in those situations with the Holocaust, how much of that is getting carried through generations through unresolved feelings. And therefore that affecting the physiology of the person, right? Kind of going with both that book, but also the kind of idea of the body keeps the score.
Yeah.
And that affecting everything. Versus even if you've received treatment and everything's resolved, you still are having those effects.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That would be
I think he talked about the resolving factor being an agent of change.
Yeah.
His book had a sense of hope at the end. It wasn't like, oh, this is what it is.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to pass this on. There are things we can do.
Yeah.
To bring some healing.
Right. And
Absolutely.
that can stop the cycle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it would be very much aligned with that in mind. If when you resolve those things, that doesn't carry forward.
Yes. So you are sharing how part of what you do is this idea of the dealing with the ghost in the what is it called?
Ghost in the nursery.
In the nursery.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you do to help people kind of break through?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different things, but one of the kind of big things to do would be to essentially bring in an antidote, which is called angels in the nursery. Right? And that is this idea that we have these memories of times when we felt safe, loved, we belonged. And those memories we carry forward into how we parent, into how we interact with our children. And so we really try to help caregivers foster those moments, because what we've actually seen is that caregivers can forget those moments. They get so clouded by the trauma and the pain that they forget those moments when they did feel safe. And so we help them to really foster the memory of those moments. And as a result, they are able to think through, okay, what do I want to, from those moments, what do I want to carry forward into my parenting? And so we're not just, obviously there's the healing of the trauma itself, but it's also of fostering those positive memories. And if they really struggle, which some caregivers do, because they're so traumatized or had so few positive adults in their life when they were growing up, that we work to foster those moments with their child.
Great.
That they can essentially create and angel memories with their child. So that's a big one that we do. But also it is a lot of times helping the parent recognize and acknowledge that there are ghosts, right, in that situation, in their relationship with their child. Because oftentimes parents, as caregivers, we all do this, I think, but when you have trauma, it gets accentuated and there's more negative effects, which is that we unconsciously, subconsciously sort of reenact our own experiences with our children, our own unresolved experiences. And so I think that is where you see that kind of carry forward, where a parent who, for example, was called stupid by their parent might do the same thing to their child, not realizing that they're carrying that forward.
And probably in shock that they're doing it because they felt it themselves.
Or not even aware, Like I think sometimes it's so funny because I always heard the saying growing up, which is like you either become just like your parents or the exact opposite of them, right? Like in a desire, either you admire your parents or just are so ingrained that you do it, or you are so aware of something you didn't want. And so you work to do the opposite, right? But there is, I think, so much more nuance in this conversation, every conversation we've had about epigenetics, generational trauma, in that I think there are things that happen, and it sounds like even what you're saying, that like maybe we're not aware of. I don't think, bringing it to a story of my own, like when I married my ex-husband, like I don't think that I was aware that I was truly like reliving generational reactions and trauma. Like through this conversation and all the books that we've read, like I've also realized that one of the things that I got used to was the way that I was being communicated to and about, the way that I was being led. And I'm going to put that in quotations if you're not watching me, led, because I thought I was being led in this direction, but what I really was being was kind of like pushed and told this is the only way. But I thought that's what I needed to do. Right. And it wasn't until I experienced such a negative, which was the abuse, and such a negative that was my kids experiencing that, and my kids like having reactions, that I realized, oh my gosh, this is like been going on forever. This is what I was told was okay, or I didn't even realize was a problem until I saw the other side. So I think it sounds like some of it we may just not even be aware of.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I think a lot of times parents aren't aware that they've experienced things that are impacting their present in that way, and impacting how they parent their children.
But would you say, Melissa, everybody has some sort of ghost in the...
Probably.
I mean, we all have something.
We all have stuff.
So, I mean, are we freaking out our listeners right now?
Yeah.
Like, okay, what's the ghost?
I mean, I think, I hope not, because I would encourage every parent to do that reflective practice of thinking about what are the things that I don't have resolved in my life and in my childhood, as I was growing up with my parents, whatever, that are impacting or potentially could impact how I parent. And maybe needing other people to help speak into that as well, whether that's therapy or a trusted family member, or a pastor or something like that, where they can speak into blind spots that we have, where maybe we don't realize that we have something unresolved. We talk a lot in our work about speaking the unspeakable, and it kind of stems from this idea that children are much more aware than we realize, and there's a John Bowlby, who is the sort of father of this, the idea of attachment and secure attachment, insecure attachment, all of that. It comes from this researcher, John Bowlby, and he talked about this idea of knowing what we're not supposed to know. And oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the rest of that phrase, but I know that it's basically the idea that, young children know things that we don't want them to know, that they realize they feel things,
but they know them.
They feel things that we don't want them to feel. They're aware of things that we don't want them to be aware of. And as a result of that, they don't talk about it. We don't talk about it because we want to pretend that they don't know it, they don't see it, that they don't feel it. And they then hear, this is not something I'm allowed to talk about. This is not something I should be bringing up. And so we, in our work in CPP, really talk about like speaking the unspeakable, being willing to kind of go to that hard place and name the hard things. Because that's what children need, really, in order to kind of move forward from their own traumas, and often also to hear why, to understand why maybe their parent is acting the way that they are. Yeah. And that can be really hard for a parent because it means acknowledging that they did something wrong.
They were part of it.
That they were part of it in some way. They maybe repeated some cycle. But it's so healing for the child. So that's why I say I encourage every parent to kind of engage in that reflective practice, because by doing so, you can acknowledge it. And even if you don't immediately heal, right? Because you may not, and it may not even be this huge trauma that you're dealing with. It could be something small, but it means that when you do make a mistake, when you do repeat that cycle, you can catch it and you can, let your child know that you see that, that you're aware of it, that you did that in an age appropriate way.
Right.
And so that they don't interpret it as I'm the bad one. Yeah. Because that's what young children do when something goes wrong.
I was going to say, it's a lot of it is like what we're getting from today is this reminder that even when we don't want our kids to, or think that they will, they tend to absorb and assume responsibility. They really do look at their parents as like, you can do no wrong. So then everything that goes wrong must have happened because of what I did or made a mistake on. And so I think part of like recognizing generational trauma is also so that way we can help our kids manage, hey, this is not on you. This is not your responsibility. I'm aware that this happened and we made a mistake, but it's not what we're going to own as yours. It's mom's, it's dad's, it's whoever's. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think they do need to be reminded that it's developmentally normal because they think the whole world revolves around them in a sense. So therefore, whatever's happening to them is because of them.
Yeah.
And so they have to actually hear explicitly that it's not their fault, that they didn't do something wrong, in order to really absorb that. And they likely have to hear it multiple times because, again, it's so automatic.
Right? Like you could tell them on repeat, but isn't it like kind of a developmental as they start to realize that's like a truth?
I would say no. I would say that that's maybe a misconception, actually, that we think children need to be a certain age to understand things. And again, like I think age appropriate is always important, but also they can absorb things even if they don't consciously understand them.
That makes sense.
One of the people at child parent psychotherapy that did a lot of work with pregnant women. She also did a lot of work in the NICU. And she would talk babies through what was happening to them. She'd talk to them and say, okay, they're going to check your temperature now. They're going to do this. There's going to be a little poke, and she would really talk them through in this really loving, kind way and what was happening and what they were seeing anecdotally. We don't have research to support this or data to support this yet, but what we're seeing anecdotally is the babies are calmer.
Yeah.
They're not crying as much. They are they maybe not understanding, but they hear that, this is being done for a good reason, and what's happening, what's going to happen. And as a result, a lot of the nurses started to do that with the babies at the NICU. And so they were able to have this just different relationship with these babies, not with this idea that the baby was understanding everything, but that they could absorb something from it.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
And that they were treated as more than just like a being to treat, right? But instead they were like a human confusing. And like they were being paid attention to and brought awareness to. I know you do that a lot with your son. He's 16 months old, and you talk him through what's going on in your lives and what's going to happen and where it's going to happen. You always have encouraged me to do that with the girls. And I really do see a difference. Ryan was young for, I think, probably what would be considered the norm, to understand that her dad was absent and not personalize it. She personalized it at the beginning, I think, as expected. We all talked her through it and kept repeating like, hey, that's not on you, and he does love you, even though this is hard, even though his love may not look how we expect, but it's not because of who you are at all. But then I feel like she was pretty young when she started to be like, oh yeah, it's not on me. And she even then started to tell her sister that, it's not on me. It's not on you. You didn't do anything. This is just where we're at. And look, we're still happy. That's what my daughter used to say all the time. Like, look, I still have a fantastic time. It's fine. So,
oh my gosh, you're coping.
Yeah.
Years ago when my mom was very sick, my siblings, we all got together. I would say it was before she died, maybe a year before or something. We happened to all be together. I don't remember why. But anyway, we were having a conversation around the kitchen and sharing stories. And all of a sudden, we literally got flooded. So I think there were 5 of us telling stories. And all of a sudden, we're like, oh, you went through that?
Yeah.
What? So we each knew our own thing, but we didn't know the others. We knew a few, but not the others. And we had to stop. We couldn't talk anymore because it was so painful. And so that's kind of like naming the ghost in a room, but not in a setting where someone was there to like rescue us. Because maybe in one sense we thought one of us was going to be okay, and the rest of us can lean on that person. But quickly, as it went around the room, we realized that every single person has gone to trauma and pretty severe stuff that none of us could rescue each other. Yeah. We flooded ourselves. That's really what we did. So. Yeah, I mean, it's important to go get help, right?
Yes. And I would say that we also talk a lot about dyadic regulation. So this idea that we can regulate together, even when we're...
Like, how would you have done that? If you were there, how would you help us? Because we literally had to stop
outside
talking.
The situation.
Well, I get
but
it. Yeah.
I can give an example from my own life with my son, for example, right? Because this is where I try to utilize it often.
Dyadic
not always great at it.
Okay.
But when I start to feel flooded with his emotions, I try to focus on my own breathing instead of focusing on trying to calm him down for a moment, because I'm not calm.
Yeah.
Right. So I try to bring myself down. And in doing so, I try to invite him into that. Right. So we together can calm down. Instead of it being like, I either have to leave the room, which sometimes you do. Sometimes as a parent, you have to like walk away, right? Especially when they're little and they won't stop screaming. And, sometimes that's the more protective thing to do, is to step away for a moment. But in these situations where I can stay, where I can handle it, at least enough, is just to really focus on kind of with him there, even if he's yelling, whatever, to just focus on my own breathing. And I'm still with him in that moment. So he's seeing me regulate. He's experiencing me regulate. And there is sort of this dyadic regulation that happens, whereas my breathing slows, his breathing slows.
It's like putting on the mask first. Don't they say at the airplane you have to put the mask on first before putting it on the kid?
Yeah.
It's that kind of action in a way, huh?
Yeah. And I think a lot of times what happens is parents get flooded and they react in that moment and then they sort of leave. Because they're like, I need to go take a moment.
Or they yell the kid down so that they will calm down, thinking that if you calm down, then I'm going to get calm.
Right.
Yeah. You expect the kid to be the
caregivers,
first.
We have to sort of take on the responsibility of starting that.
We have to be first.
But we also have to stay with them in that. Right. So we have to be brave enough to stay in the kind of flooding moment, but working on calming our body so that they can also join in on that. And by us doing that, they do it. And oftentimes it doesn't always work perfectly, but I tell you, I feel calmer.
Yeah.
Even if he's not perfectly calm or he's still upset, I think it allows me to stay in the space with him, even if I'm feeling, overwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
And so in those situations where you're in a maybe group setting where everyone's starting to feel flooded and you don't have maybe someone to regulate very well, I think, one, you might turn inward and just say, I'm going to just focus on regulating myself for a moment. And other people can join you in that, right? So you can join each other in regulation, regulate together, rather than having to stop it completely and say, I can't handle this, so I'm gonna move away. Let's all move away. Let's stay together and see how we can regulate.
Yeah, we just said, oh, it's late. I guess we better go to bed. This is depressing.
Right. And that's, I think,
everyone bolted in different directions.
And I think that's so natural, right? For us to be like, ooh, that's okay. I gotta step away. And I think the other thing too is, defenses are there for a reason.
Yeah.
Right. Defenses, coping strategies. To tear every single one down is not going to help someone. You leave them vulnerable and defenseless. Right. So I think we also allow defenses to be. It's only when defenses get in the way of life that we feel like, okay, we need to see how we can soften this one or give you a new defense. Right. But defenses in and of themselves are not bad.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, that was the tools you all had, and that worked. Right.
Yeah.
But I would wonder too, as a therapist, if I were, dealing with some group or something that was like that, were there unresolved feelings left from that?
100%. So for us, it was never get together and have those conversations.
Right.
Honestly, I think we left with, we're not doing that again.
Well, you guys haven't all been together.
Well, we've been together a little bit more after when my mom did die, but we didn't go there.
Yeah.
It was that's a place we don't go. I don't need to hear your story. You don't need to hear mine. It's too much.
Yeah.
So absolutely that's a good advice there. I had one more question, and that is, if you have a situation where a child has gone through a trauma, let's say a health trauma, and you're trying to be there for your child. It's traumatized you as well. I worked at a children's hospital, so I saw children who had cancer. So you have a child who's going through that, and the parents are going through their trauma, and they have reacted in a certain way. And now they feel like, oh my gosh, my response to this situation has now harmed my child even more because of what they already had enough to deal with, but now I've responded in such a way that I've added to the burden of the child. Maybe they're listening to this podcast and going, what have I done? Give us some hope for that person, because I just don't want people to be listening to, I could imagine people listening to this podcast and getting triggered all the way through because of their own stuff. Like, how would you help us through that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, if anything, CPP should be the kind of hope bringer in a sense, and that you can work through those things, and you can actually
define CCP again.
CPP, child parent psychotherapy. Okay. The work, I guess, sort of our theory behind it could help, because again, we bring in those angel memories. We bring in, you can resolve things that are difficult. Essentially, this idea that the difficult thing is not the final word.
That's good.
Right. And even at the biological level, it's not the final word.
Good.
Right. So you can still, I wouldn't say undo the damage is not maybe the right word to say, but you can heal from that damage. And so I think the call is not, never harm your child, because you're just not going to succeed at that. The call is to learn how to repair those moments, learn how to come to and acknowledge those moments. So maybe for a parent who has had a really difficult reaction because they're also traumatized, it's not about necessarily having the perfect reaction to those situations, because your reaction is your reaction. You can't necessarily completely control that. But it's about, how do we come back with this child and acknowledge, that must have been really scary for you when I did that. I acted this way. I can only imagine how scared you were feeling in your body, because I was feeling really scared too. We were scared together. And that in itself can be really healing for a child. Absolutely. To know that my parent reacted this way because they were scared, because they love me. That's why they reacted this way, not because they don't love me, right? Which is the kind of general automatic fear of, or because they were in danger. It's because they were trying to react in a way in love, and that we were scared together. I'm not alone in my fear.
Yeah.
Right. And that a parent can also come in and say, but we've got this together and I've got this. I'm going to take care of you. Even after I had that reaction, even in my fear, and even if that means saying, I'm going to get help, I'm going to go get help because I'm having a hard time too. But that's not on you. That's not your job. That's my job as the parent to work on that. Right? Those moments can be so healing. Even one conversation, but obviously repeated, can be so impactful for a child in resolving that moment.
Beautiful. Wow.
Because I think the shared trauma presents an opportunity for shared healing.
Beautiful.
Right?
I love Come on. I love that. Okay. So, my verse for today for us is we could talk forever.
Yeah. Especially the three of us.
Questions. I have so many questions. Okay. But the passage that I anchor to is Psalm 63 is my favorite psalm. And it says, when I think of you as I lie on my bed, I meditate on you during the night watches because you are my helper. I will rejoice in the shadow of your wings. I follow close to you. Your right hand upholds me. And this idea that, like you say, obviously you've shared with us today the importance of getting appropriate help, good therapy with good doctors, which, Melissa, is that hard to find?
Yes.
Okay. But it's still worth looking for.
Yes.
Still worth looking for. And because we're believers, trusting in God to help us through that process, help us to select, help us to endure in the process, help us to gain wisdom, help us be comforted, in all kinds of ways.
And I would say too,
right?
like, to add to what Melissa is saying and what that verse is too, is we don't have to go at it all by ourselves, right? Like, I think we have a lot of capacity as humans to look inward, deal with that. But I'll tell you, every single time I get triggered, every single time I'm having a hard time, when my kid is triggered and I'm trying to help them through it, my response first is to pray. Hey, God, help me see what I am not seeing. Help me understand what I don't understand. Help me talk to the right person who can help me or my kid or my trauma, whatever, which I do think adds a level of peace, right? Like, it's an opportunity to reset for myself too, but he does give clarity, and he's given me clarity over and over and over again. So we were dealing with this with Ryan, and she was having a really hard time leaving camp. She was overwhelmed and flooded, and I texted Melissa because I had been praying about it for days. And all of a sudden God was like, text your sister, just text her. And so I did. I was like, I'm flooded. I don't know what to do with this. And she gave me all of this information, and we just kind of went through it. And it literally helped so much, because I just needed someone else to see that whole perspective with me, because I was trying to do it in my own strength and I could not figure it out on my own strength. And so I think that we can't do it without God, and we can't do it without what God provides us to do things with, right? He provided us a beautiful relationship where I can go to you, and I do all the time. And so he continues to help and provide that resource, which is so beautiful. I think also, just to finalize this, I think what's so cool is how we are having this whole conversation about science, but at the end of the day, we also have if you're in the Christian world, right? This is generational sin or generational curses that are carried through generations. I think we're now seeing how the world defines and explains it. But I think also what's so beautiful is science really does give us helpful language on top of here's what we can do, which is pray, right? Prayer really is inward focus and focusing on God, which has a lot of the same dynamics as to what you talked about today. So I love that this can be a very well-rounded conversation.
And Jesus is the ultimate angel in the room.
Yes.
Right? That he's always with us.
Yeah.
And when we don't think there's someone there, even when my family, when we're all around the kitchen table, Jesus was there. And I think rather than running out of the room, we could have at least, and we're all Christian, and we could have all stopped and said, can we just say prayer together?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we didn't do that. We didn't reach to that. And so it's just, I'm reminded of don't forget, Jesus is always in the room.
Yeah.
He's always with us.
Yeah.
And group prayer or even dyadic prayer can be such a wonderful way to regulate.
To connect.
Right?
Regulate,
to jointly regulate. And so I think they do fit really nicely together. And I liked what you said too around this idea of show me what I'm not seeing, right? Like this idea of being shown our blind spots. You know, I think that is such an important piece because oftentimes it's really hard to see those. And even because a lot of them are so deep, they might even be hard for someone outside of us to see. But that's where, you know, inviting in the Holy Spirit and those kinds of things can really help open up some of those, you know, doors in a sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it. Thank you. This was so good.
It was such a great conversation. Well, I am so glad that you were here for this podcast, and especially here with my sister, because she's amazing. I don't want the conversation to end here. We definitely don't. So you can leave us a comment down below, or if you're wanting more information about anything we talked about today, you can also email us at hello@trochia.org. Also, just a real quick reminder, these are heavy topics, and sometimes my mom and I come at them with a lot of force. And so if there's something in this conversation today that was really hard for you, get in contact with your pastor, a therapist, a trusted mentor or leader, or a family member that you feel safe with, because these are definitely not conversations that we just want to end here today. And as always, we are so grateful that you are here with us today. God bless you.